Oh, well, the ugly chair will just have to show. Okay, so this is actually the second to last children's book. So after I finish this in the Phantom Tollbooth, we'll have to discuss whether or not we want to continue. So this book is called The Stonecutter, and it was given to my brother for his first birthday. You can see from our grandparents, it says a first edition for a first edition. Happy one. My brother was the oldest in our family. Tasaku was a lowly stonecutter. Every day, the sound of his hammer and chisel rang out as he chipped away at the foot of the mountain. He hewed the blocks of stone that formed the great temples and palaces. He asked for nothing more than to work each day, and this pleased the spirit who lived in the mountains. One day, a prince went by. Soldiers preceded him. Musicians and dancers followed him. He was clothed in beautiful silk robes, and his servants carried him aloft. Tasaku watched him. The magnificent procession had passed out of sight. Tasaku cut no more stone and returned to his hut. He envied the prince. He looked up into the sky and wished aloud that he might have such great wealth. Then he slept. The spirit who lived in the mountains heard him. And that night transformed the stonecutter into a prince. Tasaku was overjoyed. He lived in a palace and wore robes of the finest silk. Musicians played for him, and servants bowed low. He commanded great armies and ruled over the land. Every afternoon, Tasaku walked in his garden. He loved the fragrant petals and the graceful vines. But the sun burned his flowers. He knelt over the withered blossoms and saw the power of the sun. Tasaku wanted to be powerful, so he asked the spirit who lived in the mountains to change him into the sun. The spirit heard him. Tasaku became the sun, and he was happy for a time. To show his power, he burned the fields and the lands. The people begged for water. Then a cloud came and covered him, and the bright rays of the sun were obscured. Tasaku knew the cloud was even more powerful than the sun. He told the spirit to change him into a cloud. The spirit heard him. Tasaku became the cloud. With his new power, he made violent storms. Thunder rolled across the sky. Rivers overran their banks. Fields were flooded. Huts and palaces were washed away. But the mountain remained. Tasaku was angry because the mountain was more powerful than the cloud. "Make me into the mountain," Tasaku demanded. The spirit obeyed and then departed, for there was nothing more he could do. Tosaku became the mountain. He was more powerful than the prince, stronger than the sun, mightier than the cloud. But Tosaku felt the sharp sting of a chisel. It was a lowly stonecutter, chipping away at his feet. Deep inside, he trembled. The end. It's all relative. Sort of fitting and goes along with a lot of the themes of the Phantom Tollbooth, I think, don't you? All right. So we had left in the middle of a chapter. Sorry I skipped yesterday. The technical glitches just put me in a state. So we have now left the Valley of Sound and been told that they are, if they take the road to the sea and turn left, they will soon be in Digitopolis. And almost before she'd finished, they said goodbye and left the valley behind them. The shoreline was peaceful and flat, and the calm sea bumped it playfully along the sandy beach. In a distance, a beautiful island covered in palm trees and flowers beckoned invitingly from the sparkling water. "Nothing can possibly go wrong now," cried the humbug happily. And as soon as he'd said it, he leaped from the car as if stuck by a pin and sailed all the way to the little island. "And we'll have plenty of time," answered Talk, who hadn't noticed the bug was missing, and he too suddenly leaped into the air and disappeared. "It certainly couldn't be a nicer day," agreed Milo, who was too busy looking at the road to see that the others had gone. And in a split second, he was gone too. He landed next to Talk and the terrified humbug on the tiny island, which now looked completely different. Instead of palms and flowers, there were only rocks and twisted stumps of long dead trees. It certainly didn't seem like the same place they had seen from the road. "Pardon me," said Milo, to the first man who happened by. "Can you tell me where I am?" "Pardon me," replied the man. "Can you tell me who I am?" The man was dressed in a shaggy tweed jacket and knickers, with long woolen stockings and a cap that had peaked both front and back, and he seemed as confused as could be. "You must know who you are," said Milo impatiently. "You must know where you are," he replied with equal annoyance. "Oh dear, this is going to be difficult," Milo whispered to Talk. "I wonder if we can help him." They conferred for a few minutes, and finally the bug looked up and said, "Can you describe yourself?" "Yes, indeed. I'm as tall as can be." And he drew straight up until all that could be seen were his stockings and shoes. "And I'm as short as can be." And he shrunk down to the size of a pebble. "I'm as generous as can be," he said, handing each of them a large red apple. "And I'm as selfish as can be," he snarled, grabbing back again. "I'm as strong as can be," he roared, lifting an enormous boulder over his shoulder. "And I'm as weak as can be," he grasped, staggering under the weight of his hat. "I'm as smart as can be," he remarked in 12 different languages. "And I'm as stupid as can be," he admitted, putting both feet in one shoe. "I'm as graceful as can be," he hummed, balancing on one toe. "And I'm as clumsy as can be," sticking his thumb in his eye. "I'm as fast as he can be," he announced, running around the island twice in no time at all. "And I'm as slow as can be," he complained, waving goodbye to a snail. "Is that any help to you?" Once again they conferred in busy whispers until all three agreed. "It's really very simple," said the humbug, twirling his cane. "If everything you say is true," added Talk, then without a doubt," Milo concluded brightly, "you must be Canby." "Of course, yes, of course," the man shouted. "Why didn't I think of that? I'm as happy as can be." And then quickly sat down and put his head in his hand and sighed. "But I am also as sad as can be." "Now, will you tell me where we are?" asked Talk as he looked around the desolate island. "To be sure," said Canby. "You're on the Island of Conclusions. Make yourself at home. You're apt to be here for some time." "But how did we get here?" asked Milo, who was still a bit puzzled by being there at all. "You jumped, of course," explained Canby. "That's the way almost everyone gets here. It's really quite simple. Every time you decide something without having a good reason, you jump to conclusions, whether you like it or not.
It's such an easy trick to make that I've been here hundreds of times. But it's such an unpleasant-looking place, Milo remarked. Yes, that's true, admitted Canby. It does look much better from a distance. And as he spoke, at least 8 or 9 people sailed onto the island from every direction possible. Well, I'm going to jump right back, said the humbug, who took 2 or 3 practice bends, leaped as far as he could, and landed in a heap 2 feet away. That won't do at all, scolded Canby, helping him. You can never jump away from conclusions. Getting back is not so easy. That's why we're so terribly crowded here. That certainly was the truth, for all along the bleak shore, clustered on the rocks, for as far as anyone could see, were enormous crowds of people, all sadly looking out to sea. Isn't there even a boat? Asked Milo, anxious to get on with his trip. Oh, no, replied Canby, shaking his head. The only way back is to swim, and that's a very long and hard way. I don't like to get wet, moaned the unhappy bug, and he shuddered at the thought. They're all the people. They're all the people. Neither do they, said Canby, but that's what keeps them there. I wouldn't worry too much about it, for you can swim all day in the sea of knowledge and still come out completely dry. Most people do. But you must excuse me now. I have to greet the new arrivals. As you know, I'm as friendly as can be. Over Humbug's strenuous objections, Milo and Tock decided to swim, and protesting loudly, the bug was dragged along with them towards the sea. Canby hurried off to answer more questions, and the last thing he heard was, Pardon me, can you tell me who I am? They swam and swam and swam for what seemed like hours, and only Tock's firm encouragement kept Milo struggling through the icy water. At last they reached the shore, thoroughly exhausted, and, except for the bug, completely soaked. That wasn't bad at all, said the humbug, straightening his tie and brushing himself off. I must visit there again. I'm sure you will, gasped Milo, but from now on I'm going to have a very good reason before I make up my mind about anything. You can lose too much time jumping to conclusions. The car was just where they had left it, and in a moment they were on their way again, and the road turned away from the sea and began its long climb into the mountains. The warm sun and billowy breezes dried them as they went. I hope we reach Digitopolis soon, said Milo, thinking of the breakfast they hadn't eaten. I wonder how far it is. Chapter 14. The dodecahedron leads the way. Up ahead, the road divided into 3, and, as if in reply to Milo's question, an enormous road sign pointing in all 3 directions stated it clearly. Digitopolis, 5 miles, 1,600 rods, 8,800 yards, 26,400 feet, 316,800 inches, 6,306. Sorry. I'm not good at reading numbers out aloud on command. 633,000 mile and 600 half inches. That's totally wrong. 633,600 half inches and then some. I remember I was horrible at this in grade 3 too. Let's travel by miles, advised the humbug. It's shorter. Let's travel by half inches, suggested Milo. It's quicker. But which road should we take? Asked Tock. It must make a difference. As they argued, a most peculiar figure approached them nimbly from behind the sign, a most peculiar little figure stepped nimbly from behind the sign and approached them, taking all the while. Yes, indeed it does, certainly. Yes, it makes a difference, undoubtedly. He was constructed, and that's really the only way to describe him, of a large assortment of lines and angles connected together into one many-sided shape, somewhat like a cube that's had all its corners cut off and then had all its corners cut off again. Each of the edges was neatly labeled with a small letter, and each of the angles with a large one. He wore a handsome beret on top. Peering intently from one of his several surfaces was a very serious face. Perhaps, if you look at the picture, you'll know what I'll mean. He's kind of like a dice, only more complicated. When he reached the car, the figure doffed his cap and recited in a clear voice. My angles are many, my sides are not few. I'm the dodecahedron. Who are you? What is a dodecahedron? Inquired Milo, who was barely able to pronounce the strange word. See for yourself, he said, turning around slowly. A A dodecahedron is a mathematical shape with 12 faces. And just as he said it, 11 other faces appeared, one on each surface, and each one wore a different expression. I usually use one at a time, he confided, but as all but the smiling one disappeared again, it saves wear and tear. What are you called? Milo, said Milo. That's an odd name, he said, changing his smiling face for a frowning one. And you only have one face. Is that bad? Asked Milo, making sure it was still there. You'll soon wear it out for using it for everything, replied the dodecahedron. Now I have one for smiling, one for laughing, one for crying, one for frowning, one for thinking, one for pouting, and 6 more besides. Is everyone with one face called Milo? Oh no, Milo replied. Some are called Henry or George or Robert or John or lots of other things. How terribly confusing, he said. He cried, everything here is called exactly what it is. The triangles are called triangles. The circles are called circles. And even the same numbers have the same name. Why, can you imagine what would happen if we named all the twos Henry or George or Robert or John or lots of other things? You'd have to say Robert plus John equals 4. And if 4's name was Albert, things would be hopeless. I never thought of it that way, Milo admitted. Then I suggest you begin at once, admonished the dodecahedron from his admonishing face. For here in Digitopolis, everything is quite precise. Then, perhaps you can help us decide which road to take, said Milo. By all means, he replied happily. There is nothing. Oops, hold on, I just want to see something. By all means, he replied happily. There's nothing to it. If a small car carrying 3 people at 30 miles an hour for 10 minutes along a road 5 miles long at 11:35 in the morning starts at the same time as 3 people who have been traveling in a little automobile at 20 miles per hour for 15 minutes on another road exactly twice as long, but 1/2 the distance of the other, while a dog, a bug, and a boy travel an equal distance in the same direction or the same distance in an equal time along a 3rd road in mid-October, which one arrives first and which is the best way to go? 17! Shouted the humbug, scribbling furiously on a piece of paper. Well, I'm not sure, but Milo stammered after several minutes of frantic figuring. You'll have to do better than that, scolded the dodecahedron, or you'll never know how far you've gone, or whether or not you've even gotten there. I'm not very good at problems, admitted Milo. What a shame, sighed the dodecahedron. They're so very useful. Why, did you know that if a beaver 2 feet long with a tail 1.5 feet long can build a dam 12 feet high and 6 feet wide in 2 days, all you would need to build the Boulder Dam is a beaver 68 feet long and with a 51-foot tail? Where would you find such a beaver that big, grumbled the humbug as his pencil point snapped. I'm sure I don't know, replied, but if you did, you'd certainly know what to do with it. That's absurd, objected Milo, whose head was spinning from all the numbers and questions. That may be, he acknowledged, but it's completely accurate. As long as the answer is right, who cares if the question is wrong? If you want sense, you'll have to make it there yourself. All 3 roads arrive at the same place at the same time, interrupted Talk, who had been patiently doing the first problem. Correct, said the dodecahedron, and I'll take you there myself. Now you can see how important problems are. If you hadn't done this one properly, you might have gone the wrong way. I can't see where I made my mistake, said the humbug, frantically rechecking his figures. But if all roads arrive at the same place at the same time, why aren't they all the right way? Said Milo. Certainly not, he answered, glaring at from his most upset face. They're all the wrong way. Just because you have a choice doesn't mean any of them has to be right. He walked to the sign and quickly spun it around 3 times. As he did, the 3 roads vanished, and a new one suddenly appeared, heading in the direction that the sign now pointed. Is every road 5 miles from Digitopolis? Asked Milo. I'm afraid it has to be, the dodecahedron replied, leaping into the back of the car. It's the only sign we've got. The new road was quite bumpy and full of stones, and every time they hit one, the dodecahedron bounced in the air and landed on one of his faces, with a sulk or a smile or a laugh or a frown, depending on which one it was. We'll soon be there, he announced happily after one of his short flights. Welcome to the land of numbers. It doesn't look very inviting, the bug remarked, for as they climbed higher and higher, not a tree nor blade of grass could be seen anywhere. Only rocks remained. Is this the place where numbers are made? Asked Milo as the car lurched forward again. This time the dodecahedron sailed off down the mountainside, head over heels, and grunt over grimace until he landed sad side up at what looked to be the entrance to a cave. They're not made, he replied, as if nothing had happened. You have to dig for them. Don't you know anything about making numbers? Well, I don't think they're very important, snapped Milo, embarrassed to admit the truth. Not important, roared the dodecahedron, turning red with fury. Could you have tea for two without the two, or three blind mice without the three? Would there be four corners of the earth if there wasn't a four? And how would you sail the seven seas without a seven? All I meant was, began Milo, but the dodecahedron, overcome with emotion and shouting furiously, carried on. If you had high hopes, how would you know how high they were? And did you know that narrow escapes come in all different widths? Would you ever travel the whole wide world without knowing how wide it was? And how could you do anything at long last, he concluded, waving his arms over his head, without knowing how long the last was? Why, numbers are the most beautiful and valuable things in the world. Just follow me and I'll show you. He turned on his heel and stalked off into the cave. Come along, he shouted from the dark hole. I can't wait for you all day. And in a moment, they followed him into the mountain. It took several minutes for their eyes to become accustomed to the dim light. During the time, strange scratching, scraping, tapping, scuffling noises could be heard all around them. Put these on, instructed the dodecahedron, handing each of them a helmet with a flashlight attached to the top. Where are we going? Whispered Milo, for it seemed like the kind of place in which he whispered. We're here, he replied with a sweeping gesture. This is the numbers mine. Milo squinted the darkness and saw for the first time that they had entered a vast cavern lit only by a soft, eerie glow from great stalactites which hung ominously from the ceiling. Passages and corridors honeycombed the walls and wound their way from floor to ceiling, up and down the sides of the cave. And everywhere he looked, Milo saw little men, no bigger than himself, busy digging and shoveling, chopping and scraping, pulling and tugging carts full of stone from one place to another. Right this way, instructed the dodecahedron, and watch where you step. As he spoke, his voice echoed and re-echoed again, mixing its sound with the buzz of activity all around. Tok trotted along next to Milo, and the humbug stepping daintily followed behind. Whose mine is it? Asked Milo, stepping around two of the load wagons. By the 4,827,659 hairs on my head, it's mine, of course, bellowed a voice from across the cavern. And striding towards them came a figure who could only have been the mathematician. He was dressed in a long, flowing robe, covered entirely with complex mathematical equations, and a tall, pointed hat that made him look very wise. In his left hand, he carried a long staff with a pencil point at one end and a large rubber eraser at the other. It's a lovely mine, apologized the humbug, who was always intimidated by loud noises. The biggest number mine in the kingdom, said the mathematician proudly. Are there precious stones in it? Asked Milo excitedly. Precious stones, he roared even louder than before. And then he leaned over towards Milo and whispered softly, by the 8,247,312 threads in my robe, I'll say there are. Look here. He reached into one of the carts and pulled out a small object, which he polished vigorously on his robe. When he held it up into the light, it sparkled brightly. But that's a 5, objected Milo, for that was certainly what it was. Exactly, agreed the mathematician. As valuable a jewel as you'll find anywhere. Look at some of the others. He scooped up a great handful of stones and poured them into Milo's arms. They included all the numbers from 1 to 9 and an assortment of zeros. We dig them and polish them right here, volunteered the dodecahedron, pointing to a group of workers busily employed at buffing wheels. And then we send them all over the world. Marvelous, aren't they? They are exceptional, said Tok, who had a special fondness for numbers. So that's where they come from, said Milo, looking in awe at the glittering collection of numbers. He returned them to the dodecahedron as carefully as possible, but as he did, one dropped to the floor with a smash and broke in two. The humbug winced, and Milo looked terribly concerned. Oh, don't worry about that, said the mathematician as he scooped up the pieces. We use the broken ones for fractions. And there is the mathematician. Haven't you any diamonds or emeralds or rubies? Asked the bug irritably, for he was quite disappointed in what he had seen so far. Yes, indeed, the mathematician replied, leading them to the rear of the cave. Right this way.
There, in enormous mounds that reached almost to the ceiling, were not only diamonds and emeralds and rubies, but sapphires, amethysts, topazes, moonstones, and garnets. It was the most amazing mass of wealth any of them had ever seen. They're such a terrible nuisance, sighed the mathematician. No one can think of what to do with them. So we keep digging them up and throwing them out. Now, he said, taking a silver whistle from his pocket and blowing it loudly, let's have some lunch. And for the first time in his life, the astonished bug couldn't think of a thing to say. And we will leave it there. Pick up in Digitopolis tomorrow, when I will read my last picture book, because I have officially run out. There's one adult one, but I'll just do that on Facebook for adults only, because I don't want to put it on this, for people might get confused because it's a bit silly. And I think has quite a few swear words in it. Anyway, have a lovely afternoon. Bye.